ODTV. We're at Parks Associates Connections Conference at CTIA. We're with Brett Sappington of Parks Associates. Brett, you're looking at the personal cloud. In fact, you had a panel that you moderated the other day. First, why don't you tell us, what the personal cloud is?
Well, that's an interesting question because it's actually changing. When we first started looking at the personal cloud, it was all around storage. So Dropbox and a number of those other types of companies, it was a matter of how much capacity and for what price you get online. But if you look today at the personal cloud, it's interesting that what really sells those services is not so much how much storage you get, but what are the other things that come with it. So synchronization, being able to share content with other people, being able to store content online and then have it streamed to you. So a lot of those areas are really what sells those services. So it's about the functionality. And so one of the things we see in the personal cloud today is it really has evolved. Storage is just one more function. And so as we look at the personal cloud and how it's evolving, today we're really looking more at the functional side of the personal cloud rather than just the storage.
And so as part of that, the applications that go with it?
Yeah, the applications is clearly part of that. And in fact, cloud-based applications has really joined in with all of the storage and all of the other parts of the personal cloud. If you look at the personal cloud today, it's less about that. It's about storage, as I said. It's more about what do you have rights to online? What type of content do you have online? If you talk to companies, a number of companies that have cloud-based services, they'll say, oh yes, we store information about the consumer and about their use and personalize services based on that information. Then you ask them, well, who owns that information? And they'll always say, well, the consumer owns that information. So essentially for you and I, we have repositories of data that we own that are out there in the cloud. And what we're going to see in the future is how different services access that information to be able to provide unique value to us in a way that we couldn't before.
Well, that's interesting. If we own it, then we should be able to export it to other services as we want and at least be able to retain it for our own and then delete it off those clouds. Is there kind of a standard definition of what ownership means?
That's a great question, because if you talk to companies, they'll say the consumer owns it, but then if you ask, well, can the consumer delete that information or let a competitor use that information, you don't get a very clear answer on a lot of that. So there's a lot left to be done in terms of rights, privacy, security of that information, and how it's used and accessed in the future.
From a consumer standpoint, are you seeing them asking these kinds of questions? And if so, are there, do they have a little reluctance to kind of join these services?
There is some reluctance among consumers to voluntarily put information online and to trust that information online. And also, if you ask consumers about the personal information about usage and things like that online, they're very hesitant about sharing that information or making it available to others. So there's in the personal cloud and with all of this data out there, those are some issues that are going to have to be overcome for consumers en masse to begin to adopt these services.
One of the things that I see all the time is, single kind of sign-on authentication through maybe some of the social media services, to get to some of these other services makes it real convenient. But at the same time, does the consumer realize, what they're giving up in terms of that privacy and so forth?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Because if you look at security and authentication, every layer of security you add makes it more difficult to use that service. Yeah. So all of these companies are having to balance both sides of the equation. How do I make it easy and how do I make it secure?
Are you seeing any good solutions in that realm? I mean, were any brought up in your discussion and in your panel?
There are some unique approaches. In fact, there are a number of companies evolving today that offer storage of personal information online in a secure way to then be able to fill out online forms, to be able to have that information available for consumers to access remotely. There are only a few of those, though, and one of the things that we think that a lot of those companies are ultimately going to be absorbed by companies that use that information are verticals that use that authentication. There are a number of things going on in authentication today, a lot of problems to be overcome, and a number of companies that really have a vested interest in finding answers.
I would imagine a big part of it's going to come down to trust too. I mean, if you're a startup, it's hard to have that established trust with the general public. If you're a company that's been around for a long time that has a proven track record, there's got to be something there, right? As far as, you know, long term in the brand and so forth.
Sure. Trust is a critical factor. I may trust my bank more than I trust my broadband operator. I may trust my broadband operator more than I trust some website that I just happen to find online. So yes, trust is a big part of that. And as consumers begin to consider how much they're going to be involved in online services, that trust factor is going to be key in terms of generating revenue.
So we're talking a lot about the cloud itself, but what about kind of these hybrid devices where the cloud exists within the home and then outside the home?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. On my panel, we had Western Digital. Western Digital, the maker of storage equipment. There are a number of companies that deal with storage CE devices, NAS devices, other types of storage hardware. One of the points that Western Digital made on this panel is that many consumers, I think 60% or more of consumers, have real concerns about having their content online or storing their content online, and so they want to have it in home. And so what they're doing in their messaging and in how they present their products to consumers, they're really emphasizing having this device lets you have it safe at home, but then allows you to access that content remotely. And so that's kind of the angle that they're taking on the marketplace.
Interesting, and I guess the other part of it, I mean, I actually have one of those devices, and I figured out how to use it, but the question is, you know, what about the average consumer? Are they adopting this kind of thing, or is it still kind of a little bit beyond most consumers? I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's an important aspect, and it's one that the CE makers and the cloud companies are having to deal with, is the user interface. Storing and backing up information is traditionally been an IT-based function, and I don't know about in your home, but in my home, we don't have many IT experts in my home, though some of the teenagers think that they are. So as part of that, many of these companies are having to develop interfaces that are more user-friendly, drag and drop use, dealing with accidental duplication of content, and consolidating all of that, making it easier for users to do that. If you think about setting permissions, you may want certain people to access certain content. That can be a very difficult thing to go set that up for every person and for every file. So a lot of the focus among these companies is, how do I simplify that interface and make it user-friendly so that it's approachable by all consumers? Yeah, it's amazing. It just seems like, you know, as things get better and simpler, at the same time they get more complex and more opportunities, and it just the analysts like yourself are going to keep busy for a long time, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, that's the genius of companies like Apple and others that figure out how to make it approachable by consumers. And as long as there's change, there's something else for us to study.
Excellent. Well, Brett, always great catching up.
Right. Thank you so much. A lot of the